We are moving on to chapter 3 of our Trinity class. And as we're looking at this, just a couple of announcements. First of all, for Annunciation and St. Paul students, we have a retreat that we're offering March 17th through the 19th in Bloomington, Indiana. That'll be an awesome opportunity. March 17th through 19th, you should be getting something in the mail. And then also, our young men are invited to sign up for our Fraternus Ranch experience. And our young women and men who can't go to the Fraternus Ranch, June 17th through the 22nd, there is a trip that we're planning for the Steubenville Conference in July, July 20th through the 23rd. So please see me if you have any questions about any of those activities, and hopefully you're able to attend them. So we're moving on to chapter 3 as we're looking at the Trinity. And so just a little bit of a review, first and foremost, we were talking last class about faith, one of the 3 theological virtues, which are the virtues that are given to us by God, that are poured into us, and one of those being faith, which again is a strange thing to think about, the fact that God is pouring faith onto us, which gives us the ability to have faith. But yet nonetheless, that's what it is. God gives us that which we need to make an assent to believe in God. Also, God makes himself known to us through divine revelation. That's what revelation means, to reveal oneself. So God makes us known through his Son. He sends his Son to us. So Jesus says, anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. Right? There's that sense in which God is revealing God's self to us by giving us the second person of the Trinity, Jesus Christ. But also then, of course, Christ continues on in our lives in the sacraments and in the church, but in a particular way is communicated to us through sacred tradition, which is the church, okay, the teachings of the church, the things that are passed on to us through the church, and also, of course, one of those things being the sacred scriptures themselves, that which was written down and passed on in that way. And so, of course, that's continued to be guided by, interpreted by, for us, the magisterium of the church, the bishops and the pope and theologians and so forth, that are asked to safeguard and protect and hand on that which came down to us. Okay? So, a couple of things now as we think about chapter 3, which is getting to know God. What is it that we can know about God? We've been looking at that, some of that. One of the main things, the first things that we think about when we think about God is that God is one. And that might sound strange because we're talking about the Trinity, right? But what we believe is that it's 3 persons in one God. And that, of course, is a mystery to some extent. We can't fully get our arms all the way around that. But yet, nonetheless, one of the things, again, that we know is that there is only one God. This is called monotheism. I am the Lord your God. God comes to the Israelite people, to Moses, etc., and says that, reveals God's self that way. He says, I am the Lord your God. I am one. Okay? So this is much in great contradiction to all the other cultures and societies that were living around them, the Israelite people. Polytheism, many gods, right? So we know about all the different Greek gods, we know about all the different Roman gods, we know about all the Egyptian gods, even other religions that were around the Israelite people at the time. They all had these multiple gods, right? And so the first and foremost, the first thing that God wants to make sure that the people understand about him is that God is one. And we'll see that this has a lot of important implications as we've already been thinking about who God is. The fact that God is one is so important. Like the fact, if it was split up into 20 different gods, right, then we would, all of a sudden God wouldn't be, none of those 20 gods could be perfect if they had multiple jobs. Because, okay, well, which one is perfect? And if they're both perfect, then why aren't they one? Okay? So, God has a name. That's another thing that's really important for us to realize. And in fact, even in God's name, we learn so many important things about God that we've been talking about already. Okay, so knowing someone's name is important. You and I, if we know someone's name, that we feel like there's a special intimacy there. Already we're getting to know the person even just by knowing those letters that we associate with their name, right? So if you just met someone at school, but you didn't know their name, you wouldn't feel like you knew them nearly as well as if you knew that their name was Brad, or you knew their name was Julie, okay? So whatever that might be. So when God comes to Moses on Mount Sinai and reveals his name in the burning bush, this is the first time God reveals his name. God says, he tells Moses, I am who I am. Or God is saying there, my name is I am. Okay, now think about that for a minute. That has a really important philosophical, theological things that we can take away from that. What God is saying is, I am the one who is being itself. I am, God is saying, my name is, I am the person who is, the very verb is, right? To be, I am being itself. And so that, there is so many things that we can take from that and start to understand about God if we really sit with that. God is saying, I am that, and again, we can continue to try to describe it from so many different perspectives, but we can never fully encapsulate it. And yet, so God is saying, I am being itself. It's almost like God is saying at the core of the sun, I am that which is sustaining the sun. I am sustaining everything, but if you think of the world as the sun, then at the core of that is this thing that keeps everything going and is being itself. It's like boiled down to its purest, most true form of just simply fire, right? And being alive and existing and being. All these things come together in that word, in that name of God. God is conveying all of those things. God is saying basically, I am the verb to be, right? And so when you think about, if you trace languages back, right? Languages go all the way back, and you keep defining words, right? We did this exercise one time when I was in a class in philosophy in college. You trace all these words back and you continue to define them based on other words. Well, eventually you get back to, you have to decide on, and we find that the very root of all of that is you have to understand or be in agreement on what it means to be, right? To be is the most basic verb that you learn in other languages. When you learn Spanish, the first thing you learn to translate or conjugate is the verb to be. And that's the same for any other language, right? And so God says, I am that which is being, which is in the act of existence and being and so forth. So pray with that, sit with that for a while, but realize something has to simply, if you go all the way back, has to be. And that is what God is saying. Now, that's not a static, just kind of sitting there, being like this. It's an active, dynamic being. And so we'll look at a little bit about that. But the name of God is so important, right? You could spend hours kind of reflecting on that and reading about what much more intelligent people, holier people have said about that. Another thing that we can, as we know God, then basically flowing from these things, we can start to attribute things to God and describe God, as we've been saying already in these other classes about the Trinity. Knowing certain things about God's perfection, God's goodness, etc., we can start to say that these are attributes, and the church has in fact said these through the years. They all must be true if God is who God says God is, and if God is perfect, the source of all things, right? We're not talking here about Aphrodite or, Zeus or all these other gods that are imperfect, right? If God is perfect, then all these other things flow from this. And so if we think about the perfection of God and God being perfectly content and God's self perfectly happy, then we also know that God is pure spirit. Because to have a body, to have in some way be tied to matter, would make us less perfect, okay? So God, in God's essence, the Trinity, three persons in one God, God is pure spirit. Okay, now that pure spirit and God takes on human flesh in the person of Jesus Christ. Okay, so in a sense, redeeming in that way matter. But God, in the essence of who God is pure spirit. Now, God is also immutable. God is unchanging. That's a really important thing to realize too. God is not blowing about one way and then the next day he changes God's mind and back and forth. It's not like that. God is unchanging, because if you changed, then you would be imperfect, because you would either change, let's say you move from here to there, you changed your position on this and you moved over to that. Well, then that would mean one of the two things was wrong, right? Because you moved. God can't be moving back and forth. God is unchanging in that way, or immutable is another word that we use there. Okay? God is eternal. So God exists for all time and will exist for all time. If God didn't exist and God wasn't eternal, then God couldn't be perfect. Okay? And if God was eternal, the two words are related, right? Also, we know for a fact that another attribute of God is that God is all-loving. Okay? God, the thing that motivates God in everything is love. And God is love, as we hear in the Gospels. But God is all-loving. That is all God is. God has nothing other than love. Okay, so again, when we think about hell, we think about sin. God does not lash out. God simply honors our free choice to walk away from God. But God, at the core of who God is, continues to love us. And so hell is then a place where those who choose to walk away from the love of God, God does not lash out, God does not punish. God simply allows and people to go wherever it is that they choose. He's given us free will. Okay, God is all-knowing. All right, God is all-knowing, and we also call that, you might have heard that in like a literature class as well, we call that omniscient. Omni meaning all, and scient meaning to know. So knowing all, God knows all things, and that would, I mean, if there was a way we could hide from God, then God somehow couldn't be perfect, right? God somehow couldn't be perfect if God didn't know everything. Of course, God is all-powerful. Another word that we might have heard before, omnipotent. So potent meaning power, omni meaning all again. So God has power over all things. If God didn't have power over all things, then God couldn't be perfect. God is all-present, omnipresent. Okay, is the word there, all-present. That means that God is present to everything. God is always there wherever something is going on. And so all these things have really huge implications for us, but all of them also have to be true at the same time if God is really going to be perfect. And so these things, these attributes of God really become important. These are things that a child doesn't necessarily grasp about God, right? Now Jesus says, of course, that children can understand God and can know God and can come to God, and in fact can model for us in many ways how it is that we can come to God. But these are things that as we start to think about these and wrestle with these and kind of savor these or chew on these a little bit, maybe take them to prayer or think about them, they really start to help us understand and move kind of beyond that childish understanding of God and begin to really grasp and begin to reach out to God in God's truth, the truth in the fullness of who God is. So the perfection of God, the unchanging nature of God, the fact that God is eternal, is not bound by time, all right? That God is all loving and not in any way angry or motivated by anything other than love. That God is all knowing, that God is all powerful, all present. All these things are really important for us to grasp, okay? This is a little bit of a passage from your textbook that I wanted to read to you and kind of break it down because it's so beautiful. It says this: God is the creator of all that exists. God continually sustains his creatures in being, and by divine providence, God guides his creatures to their ultimate end. So let's pause there for a second. God is the creator of all that exists. So everything, including time itself. God is obviously beyond time, because if God was in time, then God would be bound by time. So God is not bound by time. God is beyond time. God creates time. God creates everything, including time. And if he didn't create everything, then God couldn't be perfect. God has to create everything. God, though, continually sustains his creatures in being. If God chose to stop thinking about you, you would cease to exist. If God stopped thinking about the world, stopped holding the world in being, stopped holding you or I in being, God is somehow holding and animating and keeping alive and keeping going all the things that God makes, right? God is also, though, giving us free will to make choices in the midst of that, him holding us in being. But God is also then guiding us and loving us, trying to get us to be with him in heaven and to join him and to even share in his life now, even while we are in time. Okay, so super important to realize that God is both the creator and also sustains everything that is going on. Okay, now God is both absolutely transcendent, so God is completely above everything that exists, but God is also absolutely immanent. So he is both above us and beyond us in all ways, but also immediately present and in fact inside me and near me and everywhere around me, right at the same time. So that's this miracle that God is both beyond us and also immediately present to us at the same time, okay? Permeating all creation. For the soul which is in a state of grace, the most holy Trinity, dwells in the person as in a temple. So God is both beyond us and also dwelling within us at the same time. So these miraculous things that are true. Okay, so questions. First of all, I want you to go to page 25 from your book, and there's one quote on that page that's in green. And it's from a Vatican I document. Most of the time we talk about Vatican II. There's a beautiful quote from the First Vatican Council. Okay, and I want you, it starts out, He is all-powerful. I want you to write that out, okay, or type it out, whichever way you're submitting your answers. It's a beautiful quote, just talking about all the things that we know about God and attributes and so forth. Number 2, what is a way of describing God's name? How would you describe the name of God when God says, I am who am? All right, how would you describe what that means and the implications to that, okay, beyond kindergarten level, right? Number 3, what are the 2 attributes of God you find most interesting, and why do you find them interesting? So we listed all of them on that one slide, and we looked at them a little bit. What are the 2 that you find to be the most interesting attributes of God, and why do you say that? Number 4, is God subject to time? Number 5, what is the motive for God for all of God's actions? What is it that motivates everything that God does? And number 6, why is Saint Therese of Lisieux, who is mentioned at the end of our chapter 3, why do you think, after you look at her story really quickly, why do you think that she is the favorite saint of so many Catholics? I bet if you polled most Catholics who have a favorite saint, probably 50% of them would probably pick Saint Therese of Lisieux. So why is she a favorite saint of so many people in Catholics throughout the world? Okay? So this concludes our chapter 3 as we continue to look at the Trinity. I pray that you have a blessed week, and we will see you next time. God bless. Please know that I'm praying for you, and keep me in your prayers as well.